This podcast is brought to you by the Prospect Research Institute, a vibrant online learning community providing high-quality educational content, the opportunity to connect with peers, and an outlet for new ideas in the field of nonprofit fundraising research.
I thought it was a great example of where research teams could elevate what they contribute to senior data-led decision-making. We can be more like think tanks. We don't have to be a bit more reactive, passive. We can be very much leading the way in thinking about strategy.
Welcome to Prospect Research Chat Bites, a podcast by and for prospect research professionals. This interview is part of the Career Curious series. I'm Jennifer Filla. Today, I'm talking with Jason Briggs, consultant and project manager at Graham Pelton.
Hello, Jason. Thank you for joining me today on Chat Bites.
Thank you for having me.
I'm excited to have someone. You're my first from the United Kingdom, my first visitor. And I'm curious, right off the bat, how did you get started in prospect research?
So a number of years ago, I was involved with developing and managing a social enterprise. And these put volunteers into elderly care homes. And about 2 years in, there was a few government changes in law to do with volunteering, a few bits and pieces, and a severe cut in funding that was available in these various pockets. So sadly, the branch that I was involved with had to close. And that was quite difficult because a lot of the service users we supplied our service to no longer would get our service. And that was a hard position to be in because I felt there was a bit of an overemphasis on one line of fundraising, one stream of funding. So I wanted to learn about fundraising and how to research different fundraising bodies and how to get people involved with a project. So I saw this job come up at Sheffield University and applied for it and got it. So yeah, very much I wanted to broaden my understanding of fundraising, and that's how that began.
So it started on the front lines. You saw the impact of, what happens when the service is gone.
Yeah,
that's painful.
Definitely. And in a way, what happens if there wasn't too much planning, foresight in the fundraising strategy and plan, because it was a bit too late to then start researching and start gathering contacts, and the situation was too critical. So yeah, I really learned the great benefit of research from where there wasn't much research. Yeah.
Or any, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, I know that you also volunteer.
Yeah.
How has that impacted your career?
So volunteering, for example, I've kind of done two types of volunteering really. Volunteering where it's more offering my professional skill set, if you like, and then another one more for personal satisfaction, I guess. So the first one, volunteering in hospices has always given you a lot of insight into the value of what charity work can be. But in terms of offering professional skills, the volunteering I've been doing has been with a Buddhist organisation who wanted to build a remote retreat centre. And that's been really interesting when it comes to developing your own skill set, because these are much more niche projects. So their prospect rules and how to develop that is a lot more difficult than having an established database or even an established cause, really. For example, the Buddhist one is Tibetan Buddhist, so now is it even further down and affiliated to a particular line within that particular tradition. So now is it even further down. So the prospect research required, the tactics were quite different than I think would be deployed in most of the charities, really. You can't just type in health, philanthropy or something, So yeah. So that's been a really interesting insight. And the way you have to deal with individuals there is quite different as well, particularly in a more religious setting.
Wow. So you've been doing some prospecting, trying to find new relationships and connections as part of the fundraising for a Buddhist organization. Wow. That is very difficult.
Yeah. And it's slightly what's interesting when you're dealing with a bit more niche organizations like this, and perhaps even you might say religious organizations, is the rules of fundraising seem to operate a little bit differently. There's a bit more what you might say kind of passionate giving. So we say in like major fundraising, sometimes it takes about 3 years to cultivate, for want of a better word, an individual towards a major donation. But sometimes in these settings where it's about strong, deep beliefs, you find someone and they're absolutely ready, to give the donation, and they do in a very short space of time. And that's what happened in our case, and there was a donation of 1.2 million, very quickly, once this person had made one connection with the project. Yeah, so behaves a bit differently as well. Yeah.
That sounds really personally rewarding to me, to identify someone with that kind of passion and then to see the results so fast. It's exciting.
Yeah, very exciting. I mean, people were really emotional and moved. The backstory is great to it as well, and it's quite powerful to even have that as an example, just to share about philanthropy in general and how it can change people's lives. Yeah.
What I'm sensing from you is that you have a very strong sense of how fundraising works with research. So, if it's always passion. I mean, affinity is one of our best indicators when we're prospecting like that.
Definitely, yeah. And I think it benefits the researcher to know a bit more about frontline fundraising, if you like, face-to-face fundraising, particularly how cases for support are developed. I think can really help with research. So if you're profiling an individual, you can therefore emphasise the right things. And we focused on that a bit more in Sheffield, having a section in our profiles about what we felt they could be interested in donating. So understanding the broader context, I think, benefits the researcher, absolutely. Vice versa too.
Well, before we move on to University of Sheffield, you mentioned that you also volunteer maybe just for fun, like not using your professional skills. Tell me a little bit about that if you're willing.
Yeah, so there was, I don't do this at the moment, but in the past I volunteered in some hospices. I don't know really why I chose hospices. I kind of always felt that people at the end of their lives have perhaps a more powerful perspective on life. They seem to be share more willing, more open. So I think I just wanted that experience of being involved with a powerful project like that can help you make your own decisions about your own life. Definitely seeing the benefit of charity work firsthand really inspired me to get into work on a longer term scale within charities. And it gives you the skill set too to do a bit of that.
I've always thought volunteering was a little addictive. Feels so good.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, there's lots of studies in there on volunteering and what kind of people do volunteer. And in general, if you volunteer, they say you're a happier person overall. So I think there is something about giving your time, isn't there? That's rewarding.
Could you tell us a little bit about, you told us how you landed at the University of Sheffield. What was your role like there? Were you the first researcher? Were you part of a team? What happened?
So they did have a bit of research going on. It probably wasn't systematic or hugely strategic. There wasn't particularly a prospect management system in place either. So my role very much was to start this up, really, to start the engine, if you like. And that involved building prospect management system from, anew, I guess enhancing the research we were doing and who we would research. And then eventually that expanded into doing ethical and reputational checks, research or due diligence checks, as sometimes they're known as. So it was very much to set that up. And what was quite unique and interesting about this situation is they recruited me first before they recruit the fundraisers. So they wanted to do some research first to see what we could project the potential might be, what kind of range and level of prospects that we have. And from there, they could start to think, oh, well, we don't need 8 fundraisers, we might need 6, So it was a good way around of doing it. And the joy of that as well was you had a system set up in place, at least conceptually, and then the fundraiser could just slot straight in. And it's all they'd ever known, It's really good to have it that way around. And I think now I've been to lots of different organisations and met lots of different people. I think that was quite rare, and I didn't realise that was quite a rare situation to be in, to build something even before the full fundraising team, I should say, had arrived. It was really rewarding.
So they were really data-driven leadership.
Yeah, one person in particular, P2A guy, he was there at the start, and he was very much about using numbers and data to make decisions. Yeah, that kind of positivity around data-driven decision-making kind of fed into the rest of my time there, really. But yeah, that was a real great privilege to start a system like that. And I think because we had that luxury, we got a few things right at the beginning. We felt we had more time for that, which I think made the process more positive long-term.
So how did you figure it out? It's not like you went to school for this.
Yeah.
And then you walk into a job and you're tasked with a big project. What did you do to teach yourself?
I just read, got some books, and in the interview, one of the things I had to do was present on how I'd set up a prospect management system. So I read a lot before the interview, because like I said, it was the kind of work I wanted to get into to understand fundraising a bit more. And this research element kind of fits, I think, my analytical personality. So I made sure I did my research first before the interview. I also, at the beginning, I didn't rush too much to put in place just what I've read. I made sure I visited lots of other universities first. So I went to London a few times, and Manchester and Leeds, and saw what they'd been doing in these parts. And I guess in a way, my head cherry-picked what I thought were the best elements, put them into a new prospect management system.
So you put together a system, did that initial research. They made the decision to hire more fundraisers. And then what happened when it started to actually be implemented? Did you have to make changes? Was there any resistance? Like, how did it all fall out?
There were some changes later down the line, even perhaps you might say more like additions to what had been in place. But certainly some of the reporting structures and things like that were edited. I mean, what I thought was useful to be on paper, if you like, in a report or some kind of analytics might not be so useful as to what they thought. So meeting in the middle there was something we had to do. I mean, that's always the case, isn't it? Meeting practical needs to what theoretical needs are. So that was an interesting process. But overall, for the people that were there, we always made sure that we got everyone involved with the development of the prospect management system. So it was never felt like this is just how it is. This is how it goes in, and that's how you're going to have to follow it. Getting people involved as much as possible with anything like that, even an analytics project. If it's a new analytics project, I think it's really helpful, isn't it, for buy-in? So people feel ownership. That's the word I'm looking for, ownership over the system. And so they're much more happy to follow as a result.
So it was a real live situation. It wasn't perfect. You had to work with people, building those relationships. And with your volunteering, you're certainly aware of how to do that fundraising side.
And I think that's what became clear the more I managed the prospect management system, is it's really a lot down to the relationship you have with the fundraisers, wherever possible, as much as possible, within reason. You should have regular meetings with the fundraisers, not just because you've got things you need to do together, but because you have to maintain a relationship with the fundraisers, particularly if they're out on the road a lot. I think you do need that one-on-one time with each one individually, so you maintain a personal relationship.
Well, the reason I discovered you and we connected virtually was because your team had won an award from the Institute of Fundraising, and I read the article that was written, and I was absolutely fascinated. Could you tell us a little bit about how the award came about?
We've been internationally fundraising for a number of years at Sheffield, particularly in the Far East, so countries like China, Hong Kong and Singapore, and they were recruiting a new role as well, a development manager with focus on international fundraising. And we wanted to check, if you like, whether or not these countries were the best place to fundraise philanthropically. So we identified a number of key reports, international reports, like the Coots $1 Million Donor Report, BNP Paribas Philanthropy Index, and we researched them all and codified them in a way. So codifying each country due to the strengths that these reports were highlighting. And then we married that with our own data, where our graduates were living, also what's the reach of our subscription resources or actual prospect research resources. And then we put that all together and created like an analytics that prioritized the countries based upon industry reports and our own data. It was really useful, and it identified some fascinating things. It prioritized countries that we wouldn't have thought of to go for first. For example, even simple things like Ireland came up strongly, and Ireland's just across the water, and we just never thought of it for some reason, never occurred to us. So it helped things like that appear to our minds that we might have missed. But also it showed some interesting facts. Obviously, we're looking for major donations, and we found that in Singapore, for example, only 1% of their $1 million donations goes to overseas projects. And obviously, we are an overseas projects to Singapore, the University of Sheffield at the time. In contrast to that, we found in the Middle East, particularly UAE country, their major donations of 1 million above, 95% went to overseas projects. So, a huge contrast there. Is there something culturally going on there that's different to attitudes to fundraising? Likely. But either way, the data was saying look at these different places. Maybe this is a more difficult place to fundraise for major gifts. So should we prioritize our time? So that's how the project was. And I think because I'd not read anything, analytics projects being done like that before, and I saw that these awards had come up, I thought it'd be good to, apply and see how it went. In a way, more than anything, to share what we've done as much as possible. I thought it was a great example of where research teams could elevate what they contribute to, data-led decision-making, senior data-led decision-making. We can be more like think tanks. We don't have to be a bit more reactive, passive. We can be very much leading the way in thinking about strategy. And so I think that's the element of it that I wanted to share more than anything with the team and the great work we all did there. And so I thought that would be a good way of doing it. And they liked it.
It is a great way to advocate for our profession to win an award like that. And what kind of impact did that have on your team when you won?
It's great. I think everyone was really chuffed, probably more chuffed than they'd like to admit. But yeah, I think, it gives you a kind of morale boost and a sense of credibility a bit more. If you want to do any public speaking and things like that, it makes you feel perhaps more confident. But even galvanizing support internally to your own department, so you've got a big department. Does everyone all see the same? Does everyone really believe data can help you answer such questions? No, not everyone does, but winning a award like that might bring to service a bit more, enjoyment when these analytics projects come about.
Yes, that's wonderful. I wouldn't have known what you were doing if it didn't come up as a published article. It's a wonderful tool.
Yeah, it was good.
And watch out, Jason, because I tell people all the time to go to your LinkedIn page and read your presentations to learn how to really measure and track in an effective way. Hopefully you'll get lots of connections and those ideas will spread even further.
Excellent.
Recently, you've had a change in your job and you've taken on a new position. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, recently I started as consultant and project manager at Graham Pelton. So they're fundraising consultants. They have a head office, big office, should I say, in the US. And this is the UK arm. So it's been going for about 4 years. And how I got into that, well, once I've done a lot of research and kind of, started to feel confident in what I was doing, one of the things I really enjoyed was sharing that with other people, whether that was through doing presentations and conferences or people saying, do you mind if I come and visit you and see how you're doing things there? So, I really enjoyed sharing, or like with the volunteering like we spoke about before. So that got me thinking, that perhaps consultancy would be a nice thing to do, to share more and more. That's kind of the angle I was going for. And I think, the best thing you can do in that situation is, like you say, apply for awards, or if the right opportunity comes up, have conversations whether or not you could join a consultancy firm. And that's kind of how it went, really. Yeah, they saw some of the projects through the presentations, and so we had further conversations, and then eventually I joined. So I started as an associate first, doing some extra work for them, and then they're happy with that, and it went from there.
Interesting. So how is working at a consultant firm different? It's got to be really different from University of Sheffield.
Yeah, it's very different, actually, in its own unique way. One of the first things you notice very quickly is obviously the expansive view of the industry and how different research and other analytics projects can differ in different institutions. So that's been, a good difference, is getting a broad perspective on the industry. I think some of the things we've been doing more of recently is, anonymous kind of research. So imagine trying to research someone without their name. So we've been moving more towards that. It's quite difficult. So we're having to think of different models and how to do that, because with the whole GDPR thing, we've been focusing on a product that can help people who are nervous about sharing personal information. So that's been one striking difference, is trying to do more research with more anonymous data, pseudo-anonymized data. One of the things as well that's quite different is you are teaching a lot more, explaining a lot more about research. When you first do kind of a research run into a database, it's kind of a bit like the first squeeze of the sponge, gets the most water. And it's like that for these different organizations. Often it's the first time they've turned their attention to research. So you get a lot of good prospects coming through quite fast when you first start researching for them. And that's really rewarding. As you'll know, after a number of years in an institution, it can get harder and harder and harder to find the next best prospect. So it's really enjoyable to move from organisation to organisation and really bring those prospects to the surface, and rewarding to feed that back to them.
Now, you work from home? Yeah?
Mostly, yeah.
Okay. And then how much of your time do you have to travel typically?
It can vary. Mainly, the firm usually tries to be present at home on Mondays and Fridays, and then Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays are often client-facing days. Whether that's on site with them, or whether that's doing Skype call or something like that. So yeah, usually the middle of the week is focused on traveling and being about, meeting people. And that's great, that's like a really nice side of it that you might not get as much in working solely for one organisation. Like the University of Sheffield is very kind of desk bound and you're dealing with similar people every day. But here it's like you're much more person facing research.
That's a big change.
Yeah, it is. Very big change. But it's a nice change.
Yeah, I guess with consulting, it is exciting to see so many different kinds of organizations. You can really start to pull together what works, what are the common threads, and identify pretty quickly where there are weaknesses. It also means, though, that you have to be pretty quick on your feet, right? I mean, you need to be able to walk in and assess.
As you do it more often, meeting individual organisations, I've noticed that gets quicker. Your decision-making on research gets quicker than it might do if at university. Universities seem to have all the time in the world, which is great. So when you're working often on very strict deadlines, because you're working usually by days with an organisation, you become much quicker at making decisions about this, that and the other to do with the research. Yeah, and it's really fascinating to see the different levels of research across all these different organisations. A few times I've had to kind of reduce my thinking in some ways. So let's say you're developing a prospect management system. They don't need the state-of-the-art, some people's system that maybe a university would need because their database is just nowhere near as big. So you've got to kind of scale things down as well. And so thinking like that has been another difference as well.
That's a really good point, because that's difficult for a lot of people to be able to do. And it really involves what you have started with, which was that kind of frontline fundraising experience. Like, you have to be able to assess people. What are they capable of? What's going to work for that particular group? And that's very different than continuing or tweaking an existing system.
Definitely.
Oh, just very interesting group of experiences you've had.
Yeah.
Oh, speaking of that, you mentioned GDPR. There's many probably in the U.S. who have no idea. Can you tell us just really briefly what that is, what's happening in the UK?
Yeah, it's kind of like an update to the Data Protection Act, and there is much more of an emphasis now on transparency. So being very explicit about how you are handling people's data. So they hand over their data. You have to really say what you're going to do with it. So if you say something like, it will be used to enhance our fundraising performance, in the past that might have done, but these days, no, you've really got to explain what you are going to be doing with that data. And then the other aspect is about consent. There's much more of an emphasis, although not a necessity, but certainly an emphasis on seeking explicit opt-in. So rather than tick this box to not be included, you need a very explicit, very clear, very freely given consent notice that says I opt in to be involved with fundraising, and giving them more choice about what they can opt in and opt out of. So yeah, and there's been a real emphasis, a real change at the moment in time. And that came amongst a scenario where, that's being introduced amongst a scenario where the Information Commission Office had fined a few charities for the way they'd handled data in these organisations. And that brought a very strong scrutiny over prospect research in the UK. Probably the biggest scrutiny it's had since it's been established as a profession. I mean, no doubt about it. And that speaks to a lot of people and speaks to a lot of charities. And I think it's settling now, and I think everything's getting clearer and people are feeling confident about the changes they need to make. And in response to that is why we're working on a model where we can do more anonymous, pseudo-anonymized research. So we don't ask for the name of an individual. or particularities about themselves that might be able to identify them. So that's kind of where that's being developed from.
Yeah, that just sounds crazy.
Yeah.
How do you do that? So you're looking maybe more at lists of, data sets, I guess, anonymous data sets.
There's things like if you're a director of a PLC, PLC or LTD, and how many years you've been there, or what's your age, and then juxtapose that with your postcode, and then checking the size of the company. So what's the turnover, what's the net assets, and what's the size of it. That can really help you project roughly what this person might be able to donate.
So instead of looking at an individual or couple's whole wealth picture, you're sort of given a piece and saying, give me an estimate there. And then it's up to the organization to plug it in. Yeah.
I've been kind of toying with the idea whether you can automate something like this. And I think you can to an extent. You can kind of create some models, analytical models, as to say, if this person's been a director for X number of years at an organization with a turnover of this much, then roughly, their donation potential might be like this. But I think also it does need the evaluation of someone experienced that's done a number of years researching individuals, because it gives you, as you'll know, that kind of sixth sense about what you're seeing in front of you. Mm-hmm. So you really need the two, the science and the sixth sense, really. So it's been really interesting to develop that. I mean, you can still do named individual research, but you have to be a lot clearer about that, about in your privacy policy and explanations.
And consent.
Exactly, and consent.
Well, before we close today, I'd love to hear your take. Like, how do you feel about the profession? If someone new is coming into the profession, what would you say to them about their prospects to have a prospect research career?
I think the profession is really healthy still, actually, and I think it's growing still, even despite this bit of a wobble with the ICO and the changes in the law. Yeah, I think it's growing really healthily, and I'm seeing jobs all the time, and they're getting more and more senior in terms of salary and position and influence in the UK. And I think that's partnering up with the idea that there isn't as much, traditional funding body available as much these days, and people are having to rely more and more on individuals to sustain their charitable causes. So you're definitely seeing a rise in that. Research can very much appeal to the academically minded, if you like, people that might have enjoyed studying various, subjects at university, and I think it really applies to that kind of thinking, really. I think where it's developing, I think you're seeing a bit of a change. Like we were saying, perhaps there's more emphasis on anonymised research, although I don't think that will be for individual organisations. But you're definitely seeing, I think, more of a move towards researchers contributing to ethical and reputational checks, which is still yet to fully develop in the UK. So not just research now for prospecting, if you like, but research to see whether the donation of this person is ethically viable for the institution, or strategically viable in some matters. I think the prospecting side has settled a bit now, and there's lots of good things out there. But yeah, I think that side's still developing.
I've always found that to be very challenging when I've been asked to do that kind of due diligence before they accept the naming gift. I always feel nervous because I can't see everything, but we look at what we can. Yeah, I agree. There's the for-profit world has that pretty well developed, but we don't do the same things that the for-profit world does. So we haven't kind of figured out how do we do that in parallel.
Exactly. And as well, how do you practically introduce this kind of research into an organisation? For example, doing a research body like that piece, you're looking for the negative news. You couldn't spend all your time also writing the positive news. You'll be there forever. So, but when you present that to a senior member of staff, you have to very strongly remind them, we're just focusing on trying to find the negative parts here. Don't just think this is all this person's done, So you have to kind of really balance the practical aspects. And then create a bit of a case law, I think. If you accept this donation here, you should use that as inspiration and decision in another decision later down the line. And I think over time, charities will develop a bit of a case law internally about what they do and don't accept. And that will come much more from the practical applications of these kind of reports. So, and they're going right up to the senior levels now, ours will go right to the Vice Chancellor, and they would even consider some of these reports in the University of Sheffield.
Well, thank you so much for sharing with us today, Jason. I really appreciate it.
Great. It's been good. Yeah, thank you very much.
That was Jason Briggs, consultant and project manager at Graham Pelton. To find Chat Bites and more prospect research resources, join us in the Resource Collections community at prospectresearchinstitute.org.